I truly admired the courage and idealism of these kids, of these activists. I was so inspired by their bravery and their vision for their country, but I never thought they would topple the government, that they would change the world. And then they did.
In the summer of 2008, journalist David Wolman traveled to Egypt to report a story about a group of activists known as the April 6 Youth Movement. These young people had just started making international headlines for using Facebook. But unlike everyone else at that time, they weren't using it to post wedding photos or plan a barbecue. They were using it to organize and rebel against the oppressive regime of Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's president.
We made a plan that I would shadow them during an attempted protest gathering on the beach in Alexandria. So we gathered on the beach. It was sweltering. The group wanted to hand out some pamphlets. They wanted to fly a kite painted like the Egyptian flag. And they wanted to get people talking about democracy and corruption and human rights. And I'll never forget, one of these activists, she was definitely still in her teens, had like a teddy bear backpack. These were just kids. The whole thing really was over before it started. We saw the dark green army trucks coming down the boulevard facing the beach. One of the April 6 guys pointed them out to me and he was like, "You need to get out of here now." So I left. And only later back reported the rest of what had unfolded. The security forces sort of swept the beach. Everyone dispersed into the neighborhoods, and most of the activists thought they were in the clear. But then the vans sort of swoop out of nowhere. A number of them were beaten there in the street, and a lot of the security officers are shouting, "Where is Ahmed Meher? Where's Ahmed Meher?"
The police came and decided to arrest a group of us.
This is Ahmed Meher. We reached him via Zoom in Cairo. In 2008, Meher was a 27-year-old leader of the April 6 youth movement, and that made him a target of the regime.
They didn't arrest me the first day, but they arrested me second day.
Leaders of protest groups would often be subject to torture in Egypt. Meher himself had been arrested and tortured a few months before, but he'd since become a public figure, and this time he was released quickly without incident.
We met up a couple of days later, after midnight, sipping tea at a cafe outside, doing sort of a post-mortem of what had happened.
David Wolman, he was a witness of what happened to us.
Wolman sat across from Meher, who was really still just a kid.
He has sort of a youthful, round face, and he's bald, which he and his friends joke about a lot. He is really soft-spoken. He is a civil engineer by training who grew up reading comic books and grew to be fed up with the corruption in his country.
It's only one party ruled by one man, the president, control everything. Political life, television and newspapers, elections and everything.
He was a reluctant leader at first, and then it just became clear that he was so good at it.
Wolman would spend his time in Cairo following Meher, watching him use all the tech tools at his disposal to organize against the government.
Every image I have in my mind of him is just always with the phone. He's tweeting, he's jumping back into the Facebook group, he's encouraging someone else to launch another Facebook group, and then he's texting, typing furiously and never sleeping and smoking hookah. He's just your classic digital native, just so ahead of the curve in putting these tools to use.
We started to use social media to mobilize people against the corruption of the government. At that time, it was new and unique.
Earlier that year, before Wolman arrived in Egypt, Meher and his friends found out just how game-changing Facebook could be. They created a Facebook group for the April 6 youth movement. They planned to support a protest of textile workers on April 6, 2008. Within weeks, the group ballooned to more than 70,000 people.
In 2008 in Egypt, you're just not allowed to have a group of people together without having a permit. And if it looks and smells like a political anything, they're just going to quash it before it starts. To suddenly be able to create an assembly hall that can welcome 70,000 people into it, that is groundbreaking. People could gather large groups and get them all on the same sheet of music for some kind of plan.
That plan came to fruition at the April 6th protest.
An estimated 2,000 people took to the streets. Steeply rising prices and stagnant wages have pushed these people to the edge.
In the power of social media, Meir had discovered fire.
There's a lot of rage, a lot of angry people. They wait someone can lead them to do something.
The Mubarak regime's reaction to the April 6th protest had been swift. Hundreds were arrested, and the state security forces were hunting for the kid who started it all.
I started to hide myself and stay away from my home and my family. Spend the night in my car and using internet cafe with different names. But finally, they found me. They arrested me and they tortured me a lot for 2 days.
Over those 2 days, Meir was beaten for hours on end. He says the police told him that they would rape him if he didn't give up the password to the Facebook group. Finally, he gave them a fake one, and they set him free, covered in cuts and bruises.
I would never fault someone who got arrested and tortured for saying, you know what, that's it for me. I'm just going to go back to towing the line. He didn't stop at anything.
We started to make some meetings to think about what we can do after that. It was our dream to make a revolution or big events, to participate in something big like what we read in history. The revolution is our dream.
Meir and his peers were not really dejected. These kids were like half my age, some in college. A number had already themselves been arrested, imprisoned, tortured. I was so impressed that they were unfazed, but I was skeptical. I flew home, I wrote my story, a story about political activists in Egypt in Wired magazine in 2008. 16 people read it. Some of them are probably my cousins. And then I mostly put it behind me. I kept in touch with Meir. I really admired him. I never, ever imagined that they would end up pulling off what they did.
Tens of thousands have taken part in an unprecedented anti-government demonstration in the Egyptian capital of Cairo.
3 years later, in late January and early February of 2011, Ahmed Meir and his friends led massive protests on the streets of Cairo.
I was glued to the TV screen like everybody else, watching protesters camping out in Tahrir Square.
Demonstrators said they wanted to take a stand against an oppressive regime.
It was like, holy shit, these kids that I met on the beach in Alexandria with their flag, they're pulling all the strings for this whole thing. They're doing it.
Opposition activists organised the march on Facebook.
The call went out to bring 1 million protesters into the heart of Cairo on Tuesday. They have come in their hundreds of thousands.
In a country where no one was allowed to gather, hundreds of thousands did, to remove Hosni Mubarak from power. Images of those crowds in Tahrir Square would travel all around the world, inspiring a revolution across the Middle East that would come to be known as the Arab Spring. And all of it had started with a ragtag group of activists who knew how to use the internet.
Through the screens of their computers, they could rekindle some sense of hope for a better tomorrow.
My name is Garrett Graff, and this is Long Shadow, Breaking the Internet. Episode 3, The Facebook Revolution. With everything that's happened in our world since the late 2000s, it might be hard to remember just how promising that era felt. The election of Barack Obama seemed to turn the page on the divisive Iraq War politics that had roiled America for years. In blogs, podcasts, and videos shared online in expanding social media worlds, people had made their voices heard. There was the sense that democracy was on the march, and the hope that with the help of the internet, it would spread to regions long under authoritarian rule. For decades, much of the Middle East had been governed by some of the harshest regimes in the world. Dictators like Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, the Assad family in Syria, Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali in Tunisia, and Hosni Mubarak in Egypt had long ruled their people with an iron fist. In the summer of 2010, months before Ahmed Maher and his friends led the protests at Tahrir Square, no one knew yet that it was all about to change. It's June 6th, 2010, 2 years after David Wolman's visit to Egypt, in the seaside city of Alexandria. 28-year-old Khaled Said is sitting in an internet cafe, browsing the web. Said recently posted a video online exposing police corruption. It showed Egyptian officers pocketing the proceeds of a drug bust. The local police have seen the video and are enraged. 2 officers entered the cafe, demanding to see Said's identification. They grab him, and when he struggles, they slam his head against a marble shelf. Then they drag him across the street to a building entryway and beat him to death in broad daylight. They leave his body in front of the internet cafe like a warning. Someone snaps a picture. The police would say that Said died from swallowing a bag of drugs, but a photo of his face, battered and horribly disfigured, said otherwise. Ahmed Maher heard about the murder.
Khaled Said, young man, smart man, and handsome. Play guitar, and he has cats. Ordinary person from the middle class.
Maher shared 2 photos on social media. One of Khaled Said before, and the gruesome picture of what the police did to him.
We used it a lot to tell the people what is the reality of the police in Egypt, how they can kill anyone and torture the people without any kind of accountability.
The algorithms of Twitter and Facebook, so attuned to promoting content that sparked strong emotion, carried those images of Khaled Said all over the Arab world.
In 10th of June 2010, I was in my study room, and as I was browsing my Facebook feed, I saw a photo of a tortured person.
Wael Ghonim was a 30-year-old Egyptian Google executive living and working in Dubai. This is from an interview he gave to PBS in 2018.
I just could not believe the cruelty in the photo. I remember crying in my study room because I felt helpless, and I also felt that I could be this guy. I could be walking in the street, getting beaten up by police officers and dying, and nothing happens. I wanted to do something about it.
Ghonim starts a Facebook group called We Are All Khaled Said, and within a couple of weeks, it explodes to more than 130,000 members. One of them was Ahmed Maher.
Maher and Wael Ghonim connect in the virtual world and come to this loose agreement about joining forces. We need to do something.
The activists knew that to be successful in their goals, they needed to take their online momentum to the streets. But that could be dangerous.
How could we have a demonstration without being arrested under this draconian law in Egypt where you're not allowed to have more than 5 or 6 people gathered together for any kind of assembly? What could we do? They came up with this idea of standing 10 feet apart, all dressed in black, along the seashore in Alexandria.
We are looking to the sea, our shoulders to the city. That is a kind of symbolic action that we are looking to the future. And we are angry from the old city and old regime.
The activists kept holding these silent protests, Hundreds of people joined, and the videos circulated online, driving more and more people into the We Are All Khaled Saeed Facebook group. And as the group grew, it drew the attention of the state.
The state security apparatus is just Luddites by comparison. They would open a Facebook account. They would use the Egyptian flag as their little avatar, and then they would try and join the group. It was sort of laughable, these attempts to infiltrate the group. It was so clear that the 22-year-olds were winning.
Meir and Ghoneim's groups had united. Now all they needed was a moment, a spark. And that's when they got one.
The day will go down in Tunisia's history as the culmination of unprecedented protests.
Back in December in Tunisia, a fruit vendor had set himself on fire in protest of the regime of Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, his country's authoritarian president, sparking weeks of protests.
Protests which ultimately forced the president from power, an office he'd held firmly for 23 years.
The people in Tunis won, and they succeeded to remove the president. So let us try.
I just posted an event calling for a revolution. Like, we should all get to the street and we should all bring down Mubarak.
Ghoneim and Meir planned the protest for January 25th, National Police Day in Egypt.
So we said, how we celebrate a police day, and we are suffering from corruption and torture from the police. It's a thugs day, not a police day.
The Facebook event for the protest quickly garnered 90,000 RSVPs. But it was like any other Facebook event. There was no way to know how many people were really going to show up.
There was a young woman, part of April 6th youth group, who posted a video online who basically challenged Egyptian men. And she really sort of slammed her fist on the table in that way. Like, you call yourself a man? Get out there on January 25th with me.
On January 25th, protesters assembled in different locations in the poorer neighborhoods of Cairo.
Launching these disparate marches, they're able to draw in shopkeepers and everyday people who are looking on curiously from their apartments. They see these young people walking with the Egyptian flag and flowers to signal that this was a nonviolent protest. And then having these smaller streams flow into larger rivers that then eventually converged into one and landed at Tahrir Square.
This was no longer a group of young people online, no longer an idea, a distant hope.
We expected that it could be 5,000 or 10,000. It was hundreds of thousands of people showing the street, calling for freedom and justice. Finally, they joined us, and now they finally agree. Now it's a revolution.
Before long, the security force arrived en masse. Armed with shields, batons, and tear gas, they tried to break the crowd up. But the crowd didn't go quietly. The January 25th protest had been a success beyond Meir and Ghoneim's wildest dreams. They immediately planned a follow-up demonstration for 3 days later, January 28th.
Mubarak, in a totally desperate and idiotic move, shut off the internet and telecommunications networks because they thought this would be a way to thwart communications between activist groups. To an extent, it was. But what you've also done is you've now prevented like everybody's grandpa or auntie, you've stopped their ability to check in on their loved ones. By shutting off the internet, Mubarak pushed everyone out into the street.
The activists called it the Day of Rage. Thousands of police poured into the streets to try and quell the massive crowds. The protests quickly turned violent.
By nightfall, central Cairo looked like a war zone. Anti-government protesters had fought their way past police and pushed into the very heart of the city, cheering and chanting, "We demand the end of the regime."
While Ghonim was in the streets that day, watching how far the movement had come,
A young man stopped a police tank by just standing up in front of it. He could have just died if the police tank decided to, but the police tank had to stop. For me, that was an announcement of a new era. And that was kind of like the moment where I felt like that online energy could actually be converted into an on-the-street action.
Ghonim himself wouldn't have much time to take it in. A group of plainclothes police emerged from the crowd, grabbed him, and dragged him away.
I was blindfolded and handcuffed. I don't know where I went to. I was interrogated by what I assumed to be state security officers or intelligence officers. I have no idea.
Ghonim was kept blindfolded and handcuffed for 11 days. But in the absence of one of its leaders, the movement didn't stop. It only got stronger. The tens of thousands of people in Tahrir Square turned into hundreds of thousands. Thousands were injured in the clashes with police. Some were killed, but the mass protests continued. Finally, on February 8th, Ghonim was released. That night, he went straight to the state media station to do an interview. The interviewer showed him a slideshow of pictures, people who had died in the protests while he was imprisoned. A visibly exhausted Ghonim broke down crying. He said, "I want to tell every mother and father that lost a son, I'm sorry, but it's not our fault. It's the fault of everyone who held on to power and clung to it." Then he walked off the set.
Into these protests, and I've never seen such an enormous crowd trying to get into the square. Just when some observers were saying this movement was losing steam, it's been re-energized in part by the release of the Google executive Wael Ghonim.
The day after Ghonim's interview, Tahrir Square saw one of its biggest crowds yet. Young people and old people, women and little children, gathered peacefully in the hundreds of thousands. An overwhelmed Ghonim stood up on a car to lead the crowd in a chant. Egypt, overall.
The footage from Tahrir Square was incredible. I was also getting the occasional text message from Ahmed Meir. He sent me a note and it said, "Mubarak will go soon. LOL." You know, it's the best LOL I've ever received from anybody, ever.
President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down. President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down as president.
Let's see the reaction.
You feel that we are free. We are free. I am freedom! I hope this will be like domino for other countries. Everywhere in the Arab country is going to follow Egypt.
Once they were successful in Egypt, there was an incredible ripple effect through the region. You saw protest uprisings in Libya, Jordan, Bahrain, Iran, Iraq. Varying degrees of success, varying degrees of counteroffensive from repressive governments. But the hope was infectious. There was no denying the sense of hope.
It was a unique moment of celebration and crying. We were happiness, but afraid from the future. What's the next?
For a brief moment, I thought, wow, this could mean something wonderful for the world in terms of coming together somehow. Of course, that's not at all how things played out.
At the time, I was a reporter working for, namely, the Times of London. We were there to just observe whether or not these young Egyptians were able to do what many others had not been able to do before them, which is to overthrow a decades-long regime by Hosni Mubarak. We were there to bear witness.
This is Shira Frankel. In 2011, when Mubarak's regime fell in Egypt, she traveled to Cairo to report on the fallout of the revolution.
Walking into Tahrir Square, you just see a sea of signs everywhere. There are tents set up with big kind of banners in front of them, and it's noticeable that a lot of these banners have little Facebook logos on them, and that there are signs that say things like, "I love Facebook," "Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg," "Thank you, Facebook." It was not taken for granted by the young Egyptians who gathered in Tahrir Square that they were able to do this due to social media, and specifically due to Facebook.
First Tunisia, now Egypt. What's next?
Ask Facebook.
Facebook.
Wael Ghonim, the Google executive who had sparked the revolution, called into CNN from Tahrir Square.
You're giving Facebook a lot of credit for this.
Yeah, for sure. I want to meet Mark Zuckerberg one day and thank him, actually. This revolution started online. This revolution started on Facebook. I always said that if you want to liberate a society, just give them the internet.
Years later, Ghonim would look back on those comments.
I was extremely naive in a way I don't like actually now. I don't like admitting that, wow, how naive I was thinking that these are liberating tools. It's just a tool. And the fact is the economics of using it for the bad is much more rewarding than the economics of using it for the good.
The people of Egypt had been unified in their goal of removing Mubarak from power. But as the dust settled on the revolution, they became divided over how the country should move forward. They didn't know it at the time, but Facebook, the very platform that had unified them, was only furthering the division between them.
All these voices started to clash, and the environment on social media breeded that kind of clash, like that polarization, rewarded it, and made it actually less and less appealing to try and build consensus.
In 2013, Facebook would make changes to its algorithm, and Egypt would become an early case study of the havoc that would cause. Posts that inspired strong emotion, that caused people to click and comment, now had more reach. To get their message to go further, more and more people posted sensationalized content meant to inspire fear and anger, regardless of whether it was true or not. These factors would be poisonous for an Egypt that was already divided over its future. People became fearful. They demonized those who didn't share their worldview, and they drifted further and further from the unity they shared during the Arab Spring.
The hardest part for me was seeing the tool that brought us together tearing us apart.
After Mubarak was deposed, the Egyptian military assumed control of Egypt. As the protesters who had sparked the revolution called for the democratic election of a new leader, the military clung to power.
The military generals, it's not easy to say to them, okay, we are a democratic country, we have to have civilians to rule the country. It's not acceptable for them.
The military had learned a lesson Mubarak never had, that the way to the people is through the internet. The military started using Facebook to disseminate a series of letters, what amounted to propaganda. It argued that it was the true guardian of the revolution, that the April 6 youth movement, Ahmed Meir and his friends, were a group of deviants and thieves who were hurting Egypt. As the military refused to yield power, large demonstrations again returned to Egyptian streets.
12 people have been killed and hundreds injured in 4 days of clashes in Cairo.
The soldiers advance, this one firing his gun directly into the crowd.
Even as it took brutal action against demonstrators on the street, the military branded them online as thugs, terrorizing real Egyptians.
Out on Tahrir Square, some fear the military campaign is working and the population is turning against the protests.
Some citizens even started showing up to defend the military in its confrontations with the protesters. Amid all the unrest, in 2012, Egypt finally held its first ever democratic presidential election.
As you can hear, the noise is deafening. People are shouting, they're singing, cars are honking their horns.
The crowd in Tahrir Square watched as Mohamed Morsi, of the Muslim Brotherhood political group, was elected by a slim margin.
When the official results actually came out, Tahrir Square exploded.
Morsi narrowly beat his opponent, who had been Mubarak's prime minister. It was a moment for celebration, but also a sign of how divided the people were. After everything it took to make that election happen, Egypt had been that close to choosing the regime it had overthrown just a year before. Morsi inherited a country still reeling from the global economic crisis of 2008. There were gas and electricity shortages. People were worried. Their fears were only being stoked by an increasingly polarizing online world, and by the Egyptian military, which by that time had built a propaganda machine on Facebook. The people were impatient. On June 30th, 2013, a year to the day from when Morsi took office, millions took to the streets to demand his ouster.
They chanted all day long. Many of the people here had also voted for Morsi, but after a year of what they see as divisive policies, they're back, this time to oust him.
The Egyptian military seized the moment and carried out a coup against Morsi's government.
The crowd here in Tahrir Square is euphoric. That's following the announcement by Egypt's military chief that the Egyptian president Mohamed Morsi is to be replaced.
Democracy in Egypt had lasted a little over a year. The country was once again under authoritarian rule.
Morsi supporters vowing that they will take to the streets and that they will be defiant in what they say is an illegitimate military coup.
Pro-Morsi demonstrators took to Rabaa Square in Cairo, building encampments to protest the coup.
They put up tents to let the Egyptian military know that they were serious about their support, that they would remain in office as the Muslim Brotherhood. You saw the military kind of slowly encircling Rabaa until the day where they marched in.
On the morning of August 14th, 2013, the military attempted to clear the camps at Rabaa Square. Muslim Brotherhood activists, the vast majority unarmed, clashed with the military. Some protesters threw rocks and Molotov cocktails. The military responded with gunfire. For hours, military snipers fired on the activists. Death toll estimates from the massacre at Rabaa Square vary. Some estimate more than 2,000 people were killed. It began a military-led total crackdown on dissent and protest in Egypt.
If the protests that happened in Tahrir Square in Cairo in 2011 showed the good of social media, what happened 2 years later in Rabaa Square, that showed some of the harms that could be caused. When the Egyptian military seized control in Egypt, they used social media posts to stage a mass campaign of arrests. For years, people had been posting online about supporting the Muslim Brotherhood movement, and suddenly all those social media posts could be used against them in court.
This mass trial has been called a parody of justice. Cairo Criminal Court has now handed its verdict to 739 people.
Hundreds of activists were charged and convicted for what happened in Rabaa Square.
No officials or police officers have ever been held to account. Instead, it's the protesters who've gone on trial.
People were being imprisoned and held indefinitely because of what they posted on social media.
On November 24, 2013, the Egyptian government made protests without official permission illegal. But a few days later, Ahmed Maher was back on the streets anyway. Maher was charged and turned himself into authorities. He would spend the next 3 years behind bars.
It got released in 2017. I became an old man. Social media is different. The rules of the game is different. All this platform became not safe for people like us.
Egyptian authorities had mastered how to use social media to root out dissent and crack down on activism. But even today, Maher is undeterred.
For him, it seems like every arrest and every detention and every jail term just seems to further reinforce his commitment to changing his country, which is incredible.
My dreams was very simple: to have a democratic government, freedom of speech, and free elections. Maybe in the future, not now, we can have it. We're still alive, and we still think, and we still try to make something good.
During the Arab Spring, and especially the uprising in Egypt, it was just so clear that the people who were fluent with these tools had such a head start on the oppressors. Nowadays, that just isn't the case. It's just not new to anyone anymore, including the oppressors. They've caught up. Social media is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad, just like a hammer. I got to know people who put it to use in such a spectacular and inspiring way. And now to think about them and how their world hasn't really improved, to say nothing of how divided the United States is, that's sort of gutting. You know, now it is really such a trope, this idea that social media is a tool. And AR-15 is a tool also. Could be used for good, could be used for bad. But let's be a little more honest about how often it's being used for one or the other.
Wael Ghonim, the Google executive who had helped launch the Egyptian revolution, credited Facebook with its success. He'd wanted to meet Mark Zuckerberg, and a few years after the fall of Mubarak, he got his chance.
I did see him when I visited the US, and it was a nice meeting.
At the time, Ghonim was talking to a lot of people in Silicon Valley. He had seen how social media algorithms had driven division in Egypt, division that had torn the country apart. He was trying to warn people.
The consequences of this extreme polarization is going to be toxic in the society. It's going to actually get us into a point where we're all going to lose. We don't understand this yet. We created a monster.
In the early days of the internet, it was hoped that one day it could be used to spread democracy, to bring power to the people, to topple dictatorships. Because of Facebook, that had happened in Egypt, if only for a brief moment. But to Ghonim, it seemed that Zuckerberg wasn't comfortable with that.
I did feel that Mark somehow had mixed feelings about this. Like, he thought this is more of a social product where people engage. He didn't see it as a place where people spark revolutions. Actually, I remember it was funny at the time because I asked to take a photo with him, but I think Mark was not comfortable with the idea. He said, oh, we'll take the photo and mail it to you. And I said, sure. And I knew he will never mail it to me, and he never did.
Facebook's new algorithms would net the site more eyeballs than ever and drive insane profits. But like they had in Egypt, the algorithms would drive division and drive a wedge, this time in American society.
What you're looking at is the aftermath I haven't seen division like this in many, many years.
Right. Mr. Trump, good morning to you. And the conversation...
That's on the next episode of Long Shadow, Breaking the Internet. If you want to read David Wolman's original reporting on the Egyptian Revolution, read his excellent article for The Atavist called The Instigators. It's also available as an audiobook. Long Shadow is a production of Longlead, distributed by PRX. The show is produced and co-written by Ryan Swiker. John Patrick Pullen is our story editor and executive producer. Emily Barone is Longlead's managing editor. Kevin Shepard and Ula Kulpa served as associate producers. Additional editorial support by Ula Kulpa. Audience development by Jensen Rubenstein. Fact-checking by Will DeGravio. Claire Mullen did the mix. Sound design by Claire Mullen and Ryan Swikert. John Singh handles publicity for Longlead. The Podglomerate provides publicity, marketing, and promotional support for the show. Music by Epidemic Sound and Marmoset. Cover art by Longlead's creative director, Sarah Rogers. Learn more about Longlead and subscribe to our newsletter at longlead.com. Episode transcripts and more are available at longshadowpodcast.com. If you're enjoying the show, spread the word and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps others find the show. I'm Garrett Graff, and thanks for listening.